And welcome on into the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. Brett Malamud here with you, along with Zach Ahmed. Zach, how are you?
I'm doing well, Brett. Obviously, football is officially back, and we had a great week one. But a lot of things popping up, and as fantasy owners, there were some things that made us a little angry. So definitely excited to get into the latest news and everything from last week.
Yeah, it always seems that week one, you have a couple of guys get banged up, and it totally derails entire fantasy seasons, or at least the interim first half of the season for a lot of teams who didn't back up their running backs or didn't back up their wides or whatever the case may be, and they basically fall into this trap and either have to panic buy or go run to the waiver wire, things like that. Week one is also one of the most misleading weeks, I would say, out there, as we talked about at the end of last episode, where you basically have a really good week and all of a sudden the sky's the limit. We talked about Isaiah Likely and that sort of example, but you really talk about the values go up or the values go way down depending on how they do week one, and that's sort of the name of the game.
Yeah, definitely, Brett. And I mean, it is Friday today, but we definitely have some stuff from Overreaction Monday, because that's a huge holiday in fantasy football each and every year. And I mean, there was a lot from last week, so let's get into it.
Yeah, let's get into it. Before that, please subscribe to us on YouTube wherever you get your podcast. Give us the thumbs up. And Zach, we start with some news here that just came down in the last little while. I had 2 hours or so. Christian McCaffrey is going to be out this week. It came as a pretty big surprise on Monday night when the active-inactive list came out, and Christian McCaffrey was on that list for the San Francisco 49ers as they took on the New York Jets. And now it looks like there's the potential that Christian McCaffrey actually gets put on the injured reserve list. A little curious on the timing and all of that, and whether they put him on now before this game. Obviously, they didn't think it was that bad heading into last weekend. So it's kind of just been the last couple of days. Shanahan saying that yesterday was the worst day of all of this with the Achilles, and so now we kind of wait and see what they do. But bad news if you have Christian McCaffrey and took him first overall in your draft.
Yeah, Brett, and I mean the big thing that we see from this is just the curse of the first pick. I mean that's really kind of what we're looking at right now. Christian McCaffrey, the latest to go number one. But I mean, just looking back at the last 5 years, McCaffrey's been 1.01 based on ADP 3 different times, and each and every year. The first year was 2020, 13 games missed. 2021, 10 games missed. And now we're on to this year. Plus a couple of guys behind him in 2022. Jonathan Taylor missed 6 games. Justin Jefferson missed 7 games in 2023. So, I definitely think that there's just a curse there, Brett. But I feel like on the situation, it's just kind of tough now. As a McCaffrey owner, if you were lucky enough, they saw Jordan Mason there, and whether that was late in the draft, in your redraft, or even this week on waivers, that just shows you how important handcuffs are. And I mean, Brett, you and I talk about it each and every year in August, how important it is to grab those handcuffs. They are more valuable than the 5th wide receiver that you would just take a long shot on your bench. Handcuffs are where to go. So, I mean, it really tells you in this situation, McCaffrey, it could be 4 games. It could be just a couple here. But the thing about the Niners is all they care about right now is what's going to happen in February, what's going to happen in January. That's the only thing that's on San Francisco's mind right now because they want to win a Super Bowl. They know that if they go a couple games throughout the regular season without McCaffrey, they'll still be fine because their team is built like the best team in the NFL. With Jordan Mason last week, it seemed to be too much of a problem going up against the Jets. They know that their team will be fine whether McCaffrey is healthy or not. They know, though, in January that they will need Christian McCaffrey more than anybody on their roster. And I think for that reason, they'll just take it slowly here. They will not rush him back and just kind of if he feels a little bit of soreness, he's not feeling great, they'll say, okay, yeah, go on the bench. We got other guys right behind you. Next man up. I think that's just kind of where we are right now in the start of 2024.
Yeah, so fantasy strategy now, like looking at it, you and I play in a league where actually it seemed to be towards the half of the draft that people were taking other people's handcuffs. And so, you sort of fall into that place where, I ended up getting Zach Charbonnet and I had Breece Hall, and I couldn't exactly make my handcuff of Breece Hall. So, this weekend it'll actually help with the Kenneth Walkers, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But as far as this case here goes, if you didn't go out and you didn't get Jordan Mason, you used Christian McCaffrey on the first pick, you're panicked. I just know that is how those owners are right now if you don't have Jordan Mason on your team. And so really, you kind of have to go to the waiver wire right now. There's a ton of guys that are still out there. Alexander Mattison is one that kind of comes to mind. Didn't get picked up in a ton of leagues. Zach, you picked him up in our Dynasty League. He was out there. You sort of just got to go week to week right now, I would say. Yeah, as far as McCaffrey goes, like he's going to be out potentially another 4 weeks. You're talking about 6 total weeks here, depending when they put him on IR, if they put him on IR. And so you're kind of just scrambling here and play it week to week. Don't look at it like 6 weeks. Look at it week to week. So for me, Madison is the guy I would have for this week, and then sort of just roll the ball each week out, and hopefully you can kind of piece together a couple wins. And if you can go like 3-3, like you're still in your playoff hunt most likely in your league. So yeah, if you did well last week, then that's great, and you got to just kind of keep piecing it together. But I know that there's a lot of people that rushed in on going to get Jordan Mason, and didn't own Christian McCaffrey. And so for those McCaffrey owners, it might be a little muddy water for a few weeks here.
Yeah, definitely. And just this is kind of a time if you are a McCaffrey owner to, I wouldn't say this week because obviously this news comes out on Friday. There's a game that already happened on Thursday and just kind of looking at everything for the weekend, teams most likely are set with their lineup. If you're a McCaffrey owner, I would say go into next week saying, all right, well, I have an advantage over some teams at this position or that position, whether it's wide receiver, you got a better tight end, you got maybe even backup tight ends, and try and piece up a little bit. If you weren't able to get like 3 running backs, there's some teams that if you drafted McCaffrey, you said, all right, him and one more guy and I'm good. I think if you're in that situation, try and trade one of those sort of depth pieces that you have at another position and figure out a way to piece in a low end RB2, maybe even just an RB3. It'll definitely soften the blow rather than starting a handcuff guy or a backup running back that you're going to hope and pray that he just falls into the end zone. I think that would be my advice for McCaffrey owners. Don't panic because it's so early, but also try and figure out a way to kind of ease that loss of McCaffrey if he goes on IR with another running back.
Fair to say, and kind of an interesting segue here. If you sort of took our advice heading into this draft season, you went out and you drafted a ton of wides because there were a ton of wides to draft later in this. And so you kind of rushed to the running backs early, grabbed a bunch of wides to back them up. But if you did pick Puka Nacua there in that second round, third round range, depending on where he went in your draft. You're dealing with another guy who's going to be out for 4 weeks, and he goes to the IR after hurting his knee. It looked like he jammed his knee on the turf at the end of that game and missed, or I should say, the end of that first half. Tried to come back in. It didn't look great. So he ends up going to IR. So he's going to be out 4 weeks now at a minimum. There's talk he could potentially miss more than that based on how he progresses during his time on IR. But the PCL sprains, it's the same knee that was bothering him during training camp. And now you're sort of scrambling a little bit. But hopefully not if you backed up your wide receivers here.
Yeah, definitely, Brett. And I mean, when you look at this one, it's just kind of a bummer. The second round player in Puka Nacua, and it really, from the start, he had those couple of plays and was in for a couple of drives, and you just knew something wasn't really right. Obviously goes on IR now, and Cooper Kupp is gonna have an absolute field day coming off of last week. We'll get into him in just a tiny bit. But Puka Nacua, if you're a Nacua owner, I don't think you're too worried because there were so many wide receivers this year that you definitely got a couple of guys right behind him. They may not be wide receiver ones. They may be just low end wide receiver twos. And that's okay. That's fine as long as you're able to comfortably fill your roster, your flex with another running back or another wide receiver. Depending on how many teams are in your league. Like if you're in a 12-man, it may be a little bit tougher if you had Nacua because it slim guys when it was kind of slim pickings once you got to like the 7th or 8th round. But I do think for Nacua owners, it's really now focusing on just having that wide receiver depth. And this is the year where the wide receiver depth definitely showed up. So I don't know if it's too much of a worry. Plus, I think just it's going to be probably 4 weeks. We're looking at it. Yes, it could be just a couple of weeks longer, but I feel like Nacua's thing, they put him on IR, and I in 4 weeks or so, you'll probably feel okay with how your roster is doing, and adding Nacua back after that, you'll probably be very happy.
I think that the immediate impact from this news is just the absolute steal in this draft that Cooper Kupp has become. And, you talk about putting on a show. He had 14 catches, 110 yards on 21 targets, scored a touchdown as well. They did all give him a couple of rushes for 10 yards. And so curious to see if they use him as sort of those jet sweeps and things like that, end arounds. And so I think that this was vintage Cooper Kupp. This is the Cooper Kupp we saw a couple years ago. And, before he sort of battled the injuries last year, this is what we think we're going to get here. And if he's getting 21 targets just in essentially one half of football, because the bulk of them came in that second half, I think that, looking at what a full game is going to be, we're talking about 25 targets, close to 30 targets if they play the game that we think that they will. Demarcus Robinson's still out there in a bunch of leagues. Tom Johnson out there in a bunch of leagues too. But, this is going to be Cooper Kupp's show here, and they're going to kind of feed him as much as possible in easy 5 receiver this week. But I would say as far as the other side of that goes, I think that this actually does up Kyren Williams' value a bit more too, because I think that they're going to sort of put some more pressure here these next couple weeks. The defense is on Cooper Kupp. It hasn't really stopped him, and they've still figured out ways to get him the ball because they sort of – here's the thing about Los Angeles, and I love what they do. They basically, put them in like motion every time. And so just to kind of segue here out into our standouts here, and we'll get to the injury just in a second. Just Cooper Kupp in general here. Like the man just basically is thrown in motion every single time, and they basically fake out the defense because by putting him in motion, you figure out if they're in a man, if they're in a zone, what's going on. Matt Stafford ran the most motion offenses plays last year, as the Rams did. And so I think being able to get Cooper Kupp in motion, it kind of gives them that lead start. They can figure out what the defense is doing. They can almost audible based off of that. We saw that a couple times, in the last game against Detroit. And so for me, Cooper Kupp's a stud. Obviously stand out last week, but stand out going forward.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this is a guy that now we see versus a couple years ago when Puka Nacua was not in the league and we had Cooper Kupp. And you just saw this guy getting target after target after target. And I think we're back to that, Brett. I think these next couple weeks, they are going to feed him the ball. And it's very strange because you'd say, oh, well, most defenses, why would you not just completely double Cooper Kupp and figure out ways? I mean, this offense has a lot of different weapons. They do have a lot of different weapons in Demarcus Robinson. Tyler Johnson had a really good week last week. Colby Parkinson now taking the place of Tyler Higbee. Plus, they got the running game with Kyren Williams. So, I mean, they have so many different parts to this offense that it doesn't make it easy to just, double a guy like Cooper Kupp. And even if you do double him, they will find ways to get him the ball. That's what they do best. Los Angeles is one of those teams, definitely, that you even saw when Kupp was out last year, Nacua was in. They still found ways to get Nacua the ball. And I think the big thing for this year so far is looking at that. I mean, Cooper Kupp is definitely an easy top 5 wide as long as Puka Nacua is out.
All right, jumping to our last injury here. David Njoku, he left the game early. Looked like it could potentially be a high ankle sprain. Ends up being a sprained ankle anyway. And so they kind of basically said, we'll see what happens. He's week to week. And then it came out that he was just out. They immediately ruled him out right after, like a day after that. I think it was on Wednesday. And so basically, Njoku's out. Now they kind of have to go to piece together their game plan. Jordan Atkins is going to end up being the starter this week. We don't have a ton of confidence in the quarterback, and we've talked about that at length. But, does Jerome Ford get a little bit of a boost, or is it really Amari Cooper? What do you think?
I think it's both. But the point of I think really discussing this is number one, Njoku, one of the tight end ones that was drafted during redraft this year, and second, the tight end massacre that we had in week 1, Brett, where it was just very, very hard to pick a correct tight end in drafts and look at the guy and say, wow, all right, I'm confident in my tight end one. It just did not happen this past week. So I think the big thing for Njoku is you kind of have to find one of those backups, one of those tight end 2s that we talked about. And there's a lot of guys there, whether that's a Pat Freiermuth, who I have in one of my leagues, a Dalton Schultz as well, if he's healthy this week. I think the big thing for this offense, though, is now they have to really focus on this run game with Jerome Ford and try and find their wide receivers in Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy. It was just a really bad week to be a Cleveland Browns fan last week. They got absolutely trucked at home to Dallas. Dallas was better in every single part of the game. And to lose Njoku now, it really hurts this offense, Brett. I mean, this is one of the offenses now that it's almost they want to avoid them and maybe even take a defense that plays against them. That's where we're at with this offense. Just because there's only a couple of guys, and you kind of know what this offense is really going to be, especially if they're without some of their top guys.
All right, let's jump into our other two standouts here. We obviously talked Cooper Kupp being one of the first 3 here, but let's get to number 2 and number 3 here. Joe Mixon. This was something to see here. I did not see this coming. I can just say it right up front. He got 30 carries in this game, 159 yards, only scored 1 touchdown. but it didn't really matter. The 159 yards on 30 carries, I think, speaks for itself. Also caught 3 balls for 19 yards. So good to see that he's working himself into the passing game. But Zach, this was a huge surprise, I think, for many people out there. Just this is going to be one of these workhorse backs that I think that they utilize pretty much the entire season.
Yeah, and as a Mixon owner, I was just ecstatic. He's actually my third running back on one of my teams. So if that's what my RB3 is doing, then I am over the moon. I think that's the big thing from this past week was that they kept giving him the ball. They kept feeding him the ball, and we talk about this offense that it's going to be pass heavy, and they have so many weapons and everything. They said, all right, we're going to rely on our run game. Until you stop Joe Mixon, we will continue to give them the ball. Now, going into this week, and we'll get to their matchup this week as they play Sunday night, Joe Mixon's not getting 30 carries. And that's sad to see for a Mixon owner, but he's going to get 18 carries, 20 carries, and they're going to continue to make defenses work. Because Joe Mixon, I mean, we talk about it in fantasy, one of the most consistent running backs each and every year in fantasy. He's always getting 1,000 yards. He's always getting in the end zone a lot, especially in his time in Cincinnati. And now it's going to be the same. They're really relying on him. He's the workhorse back, and in this offense, it's going to work out very well. Like I said, not going to get those 30 carries again, but even if he gets 18 to 20 every game, he is going to get a really, really solid output. A great RB2 to have in fantasy this year.
Yeah, I think that just the workload, listen, it's a guy that right now is like a super buy high, I would say. I'm not selling him. Obviously, you talk about like your third running back, and that's awesome because that's sort of what we talk about, like building your depth. Like that's an extreme amount of depth that you may end up winning a championship with later on, or at least making a deep playoff run. And a guy goes down and it doesn't matter because you still have an RB1. That's sort of what comes with championship level teams in this game. And so, yeah, I think that, having Joe Mixon on your team, like if you can go out and get him, like sure, there's somebody who's not going to be a big believer when they drafted Joe Mixon, who still might say, oh, okay, well, I can go out and get somebody else. And you can kind of sell high on a guy and flip him for a guy like a Joe Mixon.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, so our next guy here, Allen Lazard. Zach, I don't know if this one is fact or fiction. Allen Lazard last year, let's be honest, like it was god awful. He just was. Didn't go really well for him. This week, Jets were down in San Francisco. One dart down the sideline. Aaron Rodgers made a ridiculous throw. Then he finds him over the middle and, walks in for a touchdown. He ends up scoring 2 touchdowns here, 6 catches for 89 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had 9 targets in this game. Zach, is Allen Lazard back? Or if he's not back, is it somebody else on this Jets offense that's back?
So I don't know if he's back, but I think that this does tell me just a tiny bit about how this Jets offense may work. And it's not going to be like this most weeks. They're not going to be throwing the ball like so much like they had to in this game. They were down a lot. They were down for most of the game, not all of it, and had to move the ball up the field quickly. And they did that, in the passing game. So I would say the one thing that it tells me though is I think Allen Lazard is the 2 here, Brett. I understand that they have Mike Williams, and that Mike Williams is a definitely a guy to look out for in the red zone, maybe a deep threat as well. And he kind of gives this Jets offense something different. But when you have the type of relationship that a quarterback and wide receiver have, like Aaron Rodgers and Allen Lazard, I feel like it's just hard to go away from that. Even if Rodgers had a year off and Lazard struggled last year, like they know each other so well that it kind of makes it quite easy to find each other. And I think for that reason, he is the 2 in this offense. Now, he's not going to put up the numbers that he did in week 1. Brett, if we talk about Allen Lazard as a standout at the end of a week for the rest of the season, there's something wrong. But can he get 12 points a game and maybe even push to 15? Just if they're passing in this offense? Yeah, like completely. He could get 8 targets or 7 targets in this offense each week if they're passing the ball, because number one, there's not that many pass catchers that the Jets have. It's really, you go to Garrett Wilson and that's when you're really picking right after that who is the next guy. And I think it's Lazard. They're also going to go to Brees in the run game and the pass game. But because it is so slim, really behind Garrett Wilson, just kind of picking and choosing your options, I think Allen Lazard, if Rodgers is healthy and playing, like, he's going to go to the guy that he knows best.
Yeah, it's fair. Listen, 31% target share. It was just crazy to see that kind of stat. And let's think that Mike Williams playing 15 snaps in the entire game as he works back from the ACL injury, like that sort of helps Allen Lazard. Malachi Corley coming in his first NFL game, didn't really play a ton behind him. And so, yeah, Rodgers for now is going to go to the guy he knows, and that's Allen Lazard. And so, yeah, I think that it's a little misleading when you look at the fact that he finished as wide receiver 3, just because one of those touchdowns that he scored came in garbage time from Tyrod Taylor, and so it kind of boosted the stat line a little bit. But I think teams are really going to try to, put their best guys up on Garrett, and that's really going to free up Allen Lazard to get some pretty big targets here and some pretty big yardage.
Yeah, 100% agree.
All right, Zach, so let's break down last night's game. Buffalo takes it 31-10. Tua got hurt, and I think that this is something that is a bigger conversation than a fantasy football conversation. But as far as dynasty goes, I don't know how confident we can be going forward in Tua's career. This is now, what is it, the 4th concussion that we've seen in the last 2 years, and he battled the 3.
It's the 4th in the NFL and his 5th overall. He had 1 while he was at school at Alabama.
Yeah, and so it's unbelievable. And there's been a lot of talk in the media today about like what is the future and will he retire and all of these things. I don't know if he's going to retire after this, but I also think that there might be a conversation because he did say after the last one that he almost did retire. And so now he has another concussion. It's not good. And so, obviously, like you can talk about the skill and the stuff like that. And like, we hope he gets well and everything. But I'm unsure if you're a dynasty right now, Tua, I'm unsure how far we can really keep pushing this one. And you might have to, if you haven't already, start getting some other options there on your team.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what it comes down to, because you can't really go anywhere else with it, because you're not going to trade them, you're not going to do anything like that. It's not the same value right now in Dynasty of having to based on this one could be the last one for all we know. Like he could say, all right, yeah, like this is bigger than football, obviously, and he's got a full life ahead of him, and just being able to get rid of getting all of those concussions and just hurting his body is a big thing. And I nobody would fault him if he decided, all right, yeah, it's time here. I think when you look at it for Dynasty, I would say you already have to be looking at some options. Now you definitely have to be looking at options, because we saw it a couple of years ago with the concussions. That was already a concern. So we didn't know if it would come back, but we kind of had a feeling that at some point something was maybe going to happen similar that would probably hurt his career. And I think when you look at it right now for the Dolphins, they're just hoping that they get some really good news on Tua. Um, like they said, the focus is not really on like, oh, is Tua going to retire? It's is Tua okay right now that we can look forward to the future.
And I think honestly, it would be a full circle moment for them if they went and they brought back Ryan Tannehill, former 8th overall pick for them back in like 2012, and like he just kind of was there to steady the ship while Tua gets well. And obviously, that's not to knock, Skylar Thompson, who's sitting behind him and is right now the projected starter if Tua is to miss any time. But I just think like with this sort of offense, like they're ready to roll and they're talking about like a deep playoff run. And I don't know that Skylar Thompson gets them there. And so for me, yeah, I would look at an outside option, and Tannehill could potentially be that guy, guy who can obviously sling the ball pretty far. He needs to be a great quarterback. He has a great set of weapons behind him. And so I think that could potentially be a move. Like we saw last night, Tyreek Hill had only 6 targets, only had 3 catches for 24 yards. And they kind of had to factor in a rush, attempt for him. He ended up getting 12 yards on him. But, credit to the Bills defense, but also I think that it's potentially something more to come. But I mean, even so, you take Waddle also, like it was 4 catches, 41 yards. And so, they didn't really do anything. They had to kind of rely on the run, which is why we saw a big game out of Devon Achane, 22 carries for 96 yards. I mean, again, well, it's kind of an off night for the passing game because obviously the quarterback does get hurt. He didn't look great to begin with, but he goes down with injury, and it's kind of like, okay, let's scramble here and just keep giving the ball to Achane.
Yeah, 100%, and I think that's what they're going to have to do if Tua is out, is continue to trust those running backs. They got plenty of them back there, so definitely if they stay healthy, of course, that's another big thing for them. They are really going to rely on short route and the run game to kind of get them over the line, depending on who the quarterback is. But I mean, Buffalo had a great night. We don't see too many weeks where we say, all right, Buffalo looked great, and Josh Allen did basically next to nothing in terms of fantasy, Brett. He only had 11 points this week, and you're not going to get many of those. I know Allen owners are like, well, what happened? He didn't do anything. This is kind of one of those games where, yeah, it's a dud. But I'm sure next week, the week after, you're going to be like, all right, I'm happy with Josh Allen because he always finds a way to really bounce back after these kind of games. And Buffalo's feeling good right now, Brett. I mean, a lot of people doubted them, and they look really, really strong. So just continues to give more confidence to this offense. James Cook, a lot of the wide receivers, and of course, Josh Allen.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting as far as the receiving game goes. Like we just talked, like Josh Allen wasn't great. He just wasn't. And so because of that, Shakir, Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel, Dalton Cade really did nothing. And so, a big dud from the receiving game. Was a little interested to see the fact that Keon Coleman only had 1 target and, basically didn't get a catch on it. Like he didn't catch it. And so, yeah, a little interesting to see how they gave up Diggs and then they went into this and there was like, okay, well, they don't have a number 1 receiver, and they still kind of don't. They kind of have guys that are vying for that number 1 option. Shakir seems to be the guy who pulled ahead last week, but it's still obviously remains to be seen of who can push themselves to be the number 1. This was the James Cook show, though. James Cook just basically took it to the house, and Miami kind of controlled the ball, and it was up to the defense to do the stopping here. But hat trick of touchdowns for James Cook, 2 on the ground, 1 through the air. If you're a James Cook owner, you're pretty happy. I'm a James Cook owner. I was thrilled to see the end result there. And to me, listen, I think that the usage of James Cook within the 20-yard line, within the 10-yard line in the offensive, side of the field, that to me has been the biggest eye-opening thing of this entire, season. And, kind of came to be towards the end of last season, but we weren't really sure if it was going to continue. They went out, they brought Ray Davis in, and like you were like, okay, well, here's going to be their goal line back. Listen, he ran the ball 9 times, didn't really do too much with it, and so it is what it is. Listen, Ray Davis will have some sort of role in this offense, but it's not going to affect James Cook's fantasy value, and so that's A-okay with me.
Yeah, 100% agree, and it's going to come down to games that are not like this, where it's already said and done by the time we hit middle of the third quarter. So I think when you look at the future games, yeah, James Cook is clearly going to get really all of those touches as a workhorse back.
All right, Zach, let's go right into our game lineup right now. And we start off with the Sunday 1 o'clock slate. Las Vegas at Baltimore. Zach, that scary-looking offensive or defensive front, I should say, for the Las Vegas Raiders is now going to have to face their toughest task here up against Lamar Jackson. He was on the injury report. Now he's off the injury report. Just a little bit of soreness as he missed a couple of practices here early in the week. But, I mean, it's full go for Lamar Jackson. I think it's full go for Derrick Henry as well. The question mark for me, who do you start if you have both of those tight ends?
I think you're starting Andrews this week. I understand why people would say, oh, well, Likely was great last week. And all of a sudden, he's going to be great this week too. Do you think that Baltimore is all of a sudden going to say, oh, wait, no, Mark Andrews? No, we don't want him. We're not going to target him. Do you realize that Mark Andrews was doubled on almost all of his routes last week, Brett? Or a huge portion of them against Kansas City. And that's why Isaiah Likely did what he did. I think that's a big standout point here. They're going up against a Vegas secondary that is so kind of on the weaker side. They really have a strong pass rush and a solid enough run D, but it's their secondary where they're trying to clean some things up. And I think when you look at this Baltimore offense, it's going to be hard to really guard any of these guys. An Andrews, a Zay Flowers, or a Isaiah Likely. But if you're an Andrews owner, you're putting them in your lineup. 1 week is not going to explain everything here. And I think it's going to be just a solid, typical Mark Andrews week here against a defense that's struggling a bit. But for Baltimore, yeah, it's the main guys of Flowers and Andrews. If you have Likely, maybe take a shot on them. If you have maybe an injury in Njoku or maybe a Jake Ferguson, who we'll get to in a bit, maybe then you take a shot on a guy like Likely. But if you have both, yeah, Andrews is going in your lineup, definitely.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, for me, Andrews is a tight end one. Whereas Likely's probably one of those borderline tight end one, if not very high end tight end two. And obviously, like tight end premium leagues, like that's where you sort of are going to see a lot of Andrews owners starting him over other guys. The guy on the other side of the field, though, is a really interesting case at tight end. That's Brock Bowers. Led the team with a 24% target share. Looked like he might miss some practices here with a foot injury, ends up being okay. And so for me, full go on Brock Bowers. He's in my lineup. I'm staying away from Michael Mayer right now. Obviously, you're putting Devontae in your lineup. The question mark for me really comes down to Zamir White. And, if you're in one of those 2 running back leagues and, you're kind of stacked up at wides, I'm a little concerned just on the potential role that Alexander Mattison has had in just basically eating into Zamir White's workload. And so for me, he's a borderline, guy where I'd probably start him in the flex in the right spot. And it kind of depends on what your depth is on your team. But I don't know that I can put him as a running back 2 right now. Yeah,
Brett, I mean, in redraft, I'm probably staying away from Zamir White. I think this matchup is very difficult. They were very tough against Pacheco last week, although he got into the end zone. It was not a great game from Pacheco. He just got into the end zone and it really boosted his stats. But I think for Zamir White, the big thing is it's in Baltimore. They're going to be down. And the majority of last week, Madison was just eating in to snaps because they were down in the game. And he was the receiving back. So that really just tells you all about it. Alexander Madison's going to be the receiving back. He only had, I think he had like 5 carries. He's not going to really eat into that running back workload, those touches. But Zamir White's going to be the pure running back. And I don't think he's going to get too much work in the passing game. So, like I said, I'd stay away from both. If I actually had to maybe even look at a flex guy, Madison has a chance because I think they're going to be down a lot in this game, and they're going to have to be passing the ball a lot with Gardner Minshew at quarterback. And I feel like that's where you're going to get your points more than a guy like Zamir White.
Yeah, it really just came down to the snap share. And so for me, I'm fading on Zamir White. Agree with you on all fronts there. Let's move right to the next game, Cleveland at Jacksonville. Zach, we talked about David Njoku missing. And so you're kind of, for me, I would start Jerome Ford. I would start Amari Cooper, but that's it.
Yeah, nobody else. I mean, the quarterback situation with Watson, I don't think there's going to be too many weeks more where we're looking at this team. If they continue to do what they did last week, I think there could be a QB change in the cards, Brett. It tells me right now, though, that, you're going to start the main guys of Ford and Cooper. And even for Cooper, you're kind of going to tread lightly on it because you know that there is the possibility of a collapse here. They're on the road. They're in Jacksonville, and you kind of can go back and forth between Cooper and maybe another guy at wide receiver. There's a lot of guys that moved upwards this week ahead of Cooper. So kind of just depends on who you have.
On the other side of the ball, I mean, not that I'm going out and starting this guy. I would say you should definitely keep an eye on Tank Bigsby. If he's out there, that's a deep stash that I think I would go out and add. We saw Etienne last week get that fumble, and it was a brutal fumble because he would have scored a touchdown on it. It was like, 10 times that, or I should say 99 times out of 100, that's a touchdown. Ends up fumbling the ball through the end zone and, basically loses out on it. Bigsby ends up leading them in carries 12 times, 73 yards, which was a bit of a surprise. I would definitely go out and grab him. He's still out there in like 95% of Yahoo leagues, and he's still out there in like 75% of Yahoo leagues, 75% of Yahoo leagues, and 95% in ESPN leagues. That's a guy that I definitely would go out in one of those deep leagues and grab. And if he's out there in like Dynasty or something like that could potentially be another guy to go after. Obviously, Etienne, still keeping him in your lineup. You're not really concerned. If he was a running back 1, now maybe he's a running back 2, but you're still playing him. Christian Kirk, I think, is the big question mark for me. And, I talked with you over the week of potentially setting my lineup, and Montgomery versus Kirk as my flex option, and I'm starting Montgomery. I don't know that I can start Christian Kirk. It sort of was very murky. Brian Thomas, I like him. I think that he's probably a good flex option. 4 catches, 47 yards, scored a touchdown. So you're probably starting him too. But Christian Kirk only had 1 catch for 30 yards. And I'm not that confident in him. If you have other options, I'm staying away and going with those other options. And then obviously Evan Ingram. Sorry, Evan Ingram, you're starting.
Yeah, I think it just based on matchup, tough one against Cleveland. So I think that kind of really edges into the wide receiver talk. I think it's going to be a difficult week for those guys. I'd still start Evan Ingram. I'd still start Etienne. You may have some better options than Kirk and Brian Thomas. Just because Cleveland's defense, their corners are some of the best in the NFL. And although like you would say, oh, well, the Cowboys played quite well. Yeah, it wasn't like a breakout game from CeeDee Lamb. He did just enough. They'd say, all right, I'll deal with it. That's fine enough for me against this Cleveland defense. But in a regular game, like I think Cleveland's D is kind of one to avoid going after if you have one of those wide receivers.
All right, so let's jump right into the next game. Jets at Tennessee. Zach, I think that from the Jets' perspective, like the same exact strategy that we said last week still holds true. You're starting Brees, you're starting Garrett Wilson. That's it. Like if you want to go out and you want to stash Alan Lazard because hey, he had a good week last week, he's out there on waivers, you have the room, like that's all good. But that's really, I think that Aaron Rodgers did look good for his first game back. I think that Garrett Wilson will get going. We saw some pretty good darts to Garrett Wilson that made you happy as the Wilson owner. Like you're going to start those guys. He will find Garrett Wilson plenty of times, plenty of touchdowns. I think that this could be a really good Breece Hall matchup because I think that the Jets will find themselves ahead in this. I think that they're kind of the pace that they went at last week was a little surprising. You would have thought that they would have eased him in a little bit more, Aaron Rodgers, in his first game back. He was slinging the ball, and they let him sling it, and it was, it ended up being, obviously they had to sling it down the stretch because they were down the game. But, the pace of the offense, I think that they're going to get out to an early jump here and then kind of just bury him in the run for the rest of the game. And so I see Breece Hall getting a ton of carries, especially down to this one.
Yeah, and for super flex people, I'm a Rodgers owner. I definitely am lucky this week because Justin Fields is my third quarterback, but I'm taking him over Rodgers like this week. And for people that are even discussing that, like this is not a great matchup for Rodgers. This Tennessee defense has gotten better. And kind of one of those stingy defenses. They're very tough. So yeah, you're starting your main guys in Wilson and Hall. I don't even think anybody else after that. Not even like a Lazard. I don't think so. Just because this one is a bit of a tougher matchup this week. On the other side, Brett, it was definitely a strange week for the Tennessee Titans. Obviously, going up a lot in that game against Chicago, and it just all falling apart. With Will Levis and seeing that interception was just kind of mind blowing. If you were a Titans fan, but I think they'll bounce back. They do have a tough matchup against this Jets defense. So I wouldn't love a lot of these guys this week, but you're going to start your main guys in this offense in Tony Pollard, who had a great week last week for Tennessee and kind of prove that he is the lead guy. We had those question marks all off season long, but Pollard is the lead guy. He's definitely a low end RB2, RB3 this week against the Jets. And the other guy is Calvin Ridley, who struggled to really get targets. But I feel like if the Jets kind of take the lead in this game, it's going to force Tennessee to pass the ball a little bit more. And I think Ridley as the top guy, no Hopkins there, like they'll give him more targets than what he was able to get last week. And it's a little bit of a work in progress, new coach, new offense in Tennessee. So I'd give it a little time and not freak out too much as a Ridley owner.
Yeah, Ridley still had a ridiculous target share. It was over 20%. Like I think that, we're sort of overreacting a little bit based off of what the results were rather than looking deeper into the numbers. And so, yeah, I'm a little more relaxed on the Ridley front. I think he's a good flex option for you this week. And he'll be in the lineup. I think for me, we really didn't give a lot of credit to Tony Pollard over the offseason. He signed and we were like, this is going to be a straight split. Like, this is not going to be any of, they're not going to use him enough. And they really used him a ton. And so he finished as running back 11, 61% of the snaps. Like, it was a good week for Tony Pollard, and I think that that's going to continue here. The Jets have one of the worst missed tackle rates in the entire, or I should say one of the highest missed tackle rates in the entire league. I think that this is going to be one of those games where, They're going to try to get Calvin Ridley the ball, but it's sort of going to open up the box a little bit for Tony Pollard. And we've seen teams like kind of gash that Jets front. And obviously last week we saw a ton on Monday night where they basically looked like they were going to go throw deep, and then they kind of just handed it off on a draw play, and the Jets just couldn't really do anything about it. And obviously Hassan Reddick and that whole situation that's going on right now is kind of eating up at the Jets defensive front. And yeah, I'm kind of curious to see if they utilize Tony Pollard the same sort of way that Jordan Mason was, the same way that even Debo was against the Jets.
Yep, agreed.
All right to the next one. And we go San Francisco, good segue there, in Minnesota. Zach, I think that, obviously without Christian McCaffrey, Jordan Mason becomes a must start. And I think that obviously last week he kind of did his thing. Like, he's a running back one for me this week. So absolute must start guy. You're starting Ayuk, you're starting Debo, you're starting Kittle, you're starting Purdy. Like, you're starting all these guys because you got it.
Yeah, and I mean the big one I'm looking for this week is a guy in Brandon Ayuk, who some people were a little bit angry Ayuk owners last week. He didn't get the numbers that they were really expecting. It was more of they focused on the run game with Mason. They got Debo involved in the run game as well. I'm expecting a big week from Ayuk. Definitely this week against Minnesota. Whose defense is one to take advantage of. Yeah, for San Francisco, it's starting all of your guys, and it's a good matchup against the Vikings this week. For Minnesota, it's a little bit tougher to really pick and choose, but I'm just sticking with the two in Aaron Jones and Justin Jefferson. Obviously, we got news today. Jordan Addison's out this week, so definitely set your lineups. I have him in, I think it's 5 leagues, Brett. So it definitely needed to figure out some new guys to play in his place. But I think for Minnesota this week, it's a bit of a tough matchup, a tough defense that they're going up against. But I still think Jones and Jefferson will put up their solid numbers on home field.
Yeah, and I think in the deepest of deep leagues, you're going to see a lot of Jalen Naylor picked up. I don't totally know how many points Jalen Naylor's going to end up having, or Johnny Munt. I'm seeing a lot of these deeper leagues. And this is going to be Aaron Jones. This is going to be Justin Jefferson. You're starting those two guys. I don't know that you can start Sam Darnold even as super flex. Like, it still becomes a little bit of a difficult situation for me, especially in a tough matchup like San Francisco. So yeah, I'm kind of staying away from everybody except for Aaron Jones and Justin Jefferson.
100%.
All right, so let's jump right to the next one. The Los Angeles Chargers traveling to Carolina. Zach, I think that for me, the love fest between Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert right now is quite hilarious. I think that I saw today Jim Harbaugh was like standing very proudly wearing these sneakers. Turns out that it was the same pair of sneakers that Justin Herbert had, and he went to the equipment staff and said, "Hey, can I get the same pair of sneakers that Justin Herbert has?" And they were like, "Yeah, sure. Here you go. You're the head coach." And he was just walking around the facility proud. And so we saw the pump up, like, punching him in the chest and hitting him in the shoulders. Like, there's this love fest with him and Justin Herbert. Kind of wish that he had that sort of love fest with the wide receivers because they sort of leaned into the run quite a bit last week. And I think that, J.K. Dobbins, obviously the revenge tour, we'll call it, coming back from the Achilles, like, you're starting him. I don't know that you can start anybody else. I think that, obviously, like, Herbert was okay. You're starting him as a super flex, but I don't know that you can start him as a quarterback one, even in a really good matchup against Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, I would put Ladd McConkey a bit on the flex radar, just because he was their top weapon If you had to pick a guy and you say, all right, yeah, Lab McConkey was good enough, but even that, I feel like you probably have better options. Lad McConkey, you probably drafted him as like your fourth wide receiver. Some people may have done it as their wide receiver 3. So yeah, there's the possibility that he's a solid flex option, but that's really it. I think this week is completely about the run. They are going up against the abysmal defense that is the Carolina Panthers, and they just continue to find ways to be worse than they were last year, Brett. And now this week they're without Derek Brown, who literally is their best player on defense. So I think that when you look at the Chargers, they're going to absolutely run Carolina's defense and rip them apart. So yeah, start J.K. Dobbins. I'll definitely get to that a little bit later, but he's definitely the main guy here for Carolina. I don't think there's really anybody besides Deontay Johnson as that flex option. I would say last week when you look at it, LA's defense did give up points to Adams and Myers. They were definitely good in pass rush though. So that's something to watch out for. I think when you look at the running game, I don't feel too comfortable even starting a guy like Chuba Hubbard in this offense. They're kind of falling apart. And it's just not a great time to be a Panther fan right now, Brett.
Yeah, I think that, that split was sort of what we thought was coming. We sort of thought, a bit of an inkling that it might happen. And so it was straight down the middle. I don't know that I can start either one of those guys. And, honestly, with Deontay Johnson, like he had 6 targets. It was only 2 catches for 19 yards. Very disappointing week 1. And obviously, like when you can't get anything going, that sort of day will happen. And we knew that those sort of weeks would happen for Deontay Johnson. He's right back there in my lineup, probably as a flex option. And so I think better days are ahead. And kind of have to calm the nerve a little bit when putting Deontay Johnson there.
Yep, agreed.
All right, so right to our next matchup here, Seattle at New England. Big news coming in today is that Kenneth Walker III is going to be listed as doubtful. Are you starting Zach Charbonnet this week?
100%, especially if Kenneth Walker is out. I think Zach Charbonnet, that we talk about handcuffs and how important, and we're seeing it with the McCaffrey situation right now. Zach Charbonnet, one of the most important handcuffs, I think arguably the most important in fantasy football, because that if Kenneth Walker is out or if Zach Charbonnet is out, the other guy is going to get basically every single touch and probably play close to 100% of the snaps. I think you look at the matchup and you say, all right, it's a little bit tougher. New England's front, it could be a tough one on the road. But I look at Charbonnet and say, yeah, he's going to put up solid RB2 numbers this week. Maybe even if he has a really good week, he can push into that RB1 numbers type of range. Just because he's going to get so many touches. I look at Charbonnet definitely as a great option if you have him. I look at the rest of the guys. A DK Metcalf you're starting, but you're going to see a shadow from Christian Gonzalez. And although Chase last week, when he was against Gonzalez, had 2 receptions, Brett, when he was not against Gonzalez, he had 4 receptions for like 40 yards, and that completely made his week. So I do think it is going to be a tougher week for DK Metcalf. And some people may have a discussion if they have a lot of wide receivers and they have good depth that maybe even to pick a guy over DK. But you're in a spot right now where I definitely think there's not really too many behind him. A Lockett or a Smith-Njigba that I would start. It's really Metcalf as well as Charbonnet definitely in your lineup.
Yeah, we were talking in our family dynasty league, and our dad obviously he's got him, and so he's sort of in a weird situation right now. Got some pretty good studs there. who's probably going to start ahead of him. And so, yeah, I get it from that standpoint. Like, if this is going to be a really tough matchup for all fronts, even Zach Charbonnet, if he's the guy, like, we're talking about New England, who had, like, I just talked about the Jets and how they had one of, like, the highest missed tackle rates. New England had the lowest missed tackle rate last season, second lowest explosive run rate, lowest yards after contact. Like, it just is a really tough matchup, one way or the other. Obviously, if the workload is there for one or the other, if Charbonnet is the only guy in town, like, the workload's going to be there for him regardless. And so, yeah, I'm starting him if he is in, and obviously if Kenneth Walker is okay and is ready to go, like, throwing him on up, easy peasy. DK becomes a little bit tougher, and he's probably still a flex option because you probably either don't have the depth or you have too much depth, and then he's on your bench. It kind of just depends on what your team is. I think that Jackson Smith-Njigba and Tyler Lockett are going to get some sort of a role. I went out and I grabbed Tyler Lockett because I saw he was just out there in our league as a free agent. I was like, okay, let's just pick him up, because last week Tyler Lockett had a pretty good target share, 65% route run rate, and it was a 24% target share. And so I think that, there is the potential that Lockett ends up being one of those guys. He obviously is familiar with Geno more so than Jackson Smith-Njigba, and it's sort of taken a little bit of time for him to get up to speed. Only 8% target share. He had 2 targets on the day, Jackson Smith-Njigba. And so for me, Lockett's the guy I'm stacking if you're going out, and he's out there on waivers. I know he's out there in a bunch of leagues. So that's sort of where I'm at.
Yeah, 100%, and just start Ramondre. Yeah, I think that's
it.
Yeah,
I agree. All right, so let's jump right to the next team here, and the next matchup here, I should say, New Orleans at Dallas. Zach, I just got to say, do you think that last week was a fluke for the Saints?
Yeah, I do. I don't think it's going to be that kind of week ever again, because they really just focused on the run game. They also they continued to pass the ball to every single person except for Chris Olave, which did not make Olave owners happy this past week. I look at it and say, all right, yeah, this offense is really just going to be focused on Kamara and Olave, and that's how it should be. Kamara is going to get his touches as always. You're just kind of figuring out whether the offensive line is good enough. They looked really good last week, but that was also against the worst front in all of football in Carolina. So you kind of see it this week and how it's going to go against Dallas. And really, that'll help you manage your expectations for Kamara the rest of the season, I would say. For Olave, I wouldn't freak out just yet. I do think it's a bit of a difficult matchup in Dallas now, but I'd still start him. I think he's going to get his targets. I also think they're going to be down in this game, so they're going to have to pass the ball. And for that reason, Olave will put up good enough fantasy points to be in your lineup.
So you're not starting Taysom Hill?
No, I am not. Or okay. or Juwan Johnson. None of them, even though that's crazy to say that both of them got more points than Taysom Hill last week.
Yeah, crazy times. Rashid Shaheed, I think right now for me, he sits on the bench, and it really, yes, he's having the sort of Gabe Davis season. And I talked about it with you last week off stream. Like, he basically is Gabe Davis light. And, he'll catch his 59-yarders, but then he'll also dud in a lot of weeks. And so for me, I stayed away from Rashid Shaheed. We were talking about it just beforehand. Like, I'm not putting him in my lineup. I just think that, you kind of are running into this sort of Gabe Davis thing that we saw last bunch of weeks. Kamara, cheat code. Like, you're putting him in the lineup. They're just basically giving him some cheap workload, some cheap fantasy points, easy fantasy points. With the rushes, with the dump offs. Like, this is what is making Derek Carr comfortable, and they're going to continue to try him comfortable. Obviously, he's sort of on his last leg there with all the fans, and so they're going to make him comfortable and take the pressure off him. And Alvin Kamara is doing a great job of doing that. Easy cheat code fantasy points. And so you're keeping him in there. Olave, obviously, you're starting as well. Turning it on to the other side of the ball. Dak Prescott, like he's probably still going in my lineup. Obviously, a low end running or low quarter one, I would say. You're starting CeeDee Lamb. I don't know that you can start either one of these running backs, though. And to me, like it was very, curious to see about Zeke and how Zeke would factor into this backfield. Him and Rico Dowdle, like I don't know that I could pick one over the other. It's sort of just another thing where it's sort of split. So I'm staying away from both of them.
100%, and I wouldn't be starting a tight end if Jake Ferguson is out. No Luke Schoonmaker or anything like that for me. I think it's just Dak and CD you're really focusing on this week.
All right, so let's get to a viewer question right now that we got here. Huge fan of the show, Captain Joking. Huge fan of the show, already a sub. Thank you, appreciate that. Am I insane to want to start Xavier Worthy over Malik Neighbors? I love the Neighbors matchup against the Commanders. That Hollywood IR just gets me going. Zach, what is your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, and I'm in the same exact spot. Well, not with Neighbors, but I have George Pickens in one of my leagues, and I have Xavier Worthy, and I'm all go on Xavier Worthy now, Brett. I think even though it was only like 3 touches that he had last week, like he's gonna make the most of them. I mean, this guy he's a freak out wide. I wouldn't say that you're insane for starting him over Neighbors. Would I take Neighbors this week in the matchup? Yes, I would against the Commanders. However, if you're feeling in Xavier Worthy, like I am not gonna fault you for that. Like I think Neighbors can have a really, really great week against Cincinnati, who did not look good on defense last week against New England. Yeah, I'm full go over certain guys with Xavier Worthy. I don't think Neighbors is one of them, but like I said, wouldn't fault you for it.
I believe that Andy Reid is one of those guys who just, when he finds some sort of success, he continues to capitalize in. He's a very smart coach. And so I don't disagree with this one. Listen, I have Neighbors. I'm starting Neighbors. I think it's a great matchup for him. But no, I don't think that you're insane to want to start Worthy, because I think that they're going to continue to give him opportunities. The speed that he showed in week 1 was ridiculous. And they're going to continue to give him, rushing attempts. They'll give him some screen passes, get him down the field quickly. I think that they're going to try to do all of the above. And yeah, Hollywood obviously going to the IR does help as far as like getting familiar with Patrick Mahomes over this season. And I think that they're going to try to get that right away. And everybody loves a shiny new toy. So I think that they're going to try to utilize that a bit more. Obviously, you talk about Neighbors and his impact. Like, he is the number 1 target. I also have seen Wan'Dale Robinson kind of come on in the last week. And so whether or not he gets some more targets, and we'll see what the Commanders do as far as their game plan against Neighbors. But obviously, like, I'm anticipating that they're going to kind of heavily guard him. Giants don't really have time to throw the blitz at Daniel Jones, who quite honestly was awful. And honestly deserved to be benched last week. They didn't really do it. So yeah, no, you're not crazy. I think that it's way closer than you think it is, than all these experts are saying it is. So no, I think that you can go either way on it. And so while I'm taking Neighbors, I think that it is very, very, very close.
Yeah, 100% agree.
All right, so let's jump to that matchup, and it's pretty good segue there as we go to the Giants versus Washington. So Zach, I mean, let's start right there with the Neighbors, and last week it sort of was okay. Like, Neighbors was fine, but obviously, like, the output of the entire offense wasn't good, and so you're starting him in your lineup if you have him, except in the case like this one that we just saw, but. For the ones that don't have that depth, like, he's probably in your lineup. I'm going out. I'm stashing Wan'Dale Robinson. I just said it. Like, that's a guy who I think has had a ton of opportunities in the slot last week. We saw Washington give up a ton of points to the slot. So that's a guy that I'm going out and stashing. Devin Singletary, they might have to lean into it a bit more. And so it's another guy that I kind of have my eye on as a potential flex option here.
Yeah, this week I think it's just Neighbors for me for the Giants. I think he'll get his targets. It's a really good matchup against Washington, one of the worst secondaries in football, and Neighbors will get his points. He's still in a bad week last week, Brett. Still had 11 points. I mean, he still had 66 yards receiving last week in a awful week. It could not have gotten worse than that. So I think that just kind of tells you, yeah, he's going to get his points no matter what, whether it's good day or bad day. So continue to just trust the process, although it is very hard to trust Daniel Jones all the time in this Giants offense. On the other end, Brett, for Washington, I love a lot of guys this week because I think the Giants defense is one of those that you just love to take advantage of as a fantasy owner. I am in situations right now where I'm even starting Jaden Daniels over Kyler Murray. I've gone that far this week. I've started Brian Robinson Jr., maybe even over Rachaad White this week. Like, that's where I'm at in terms of, like, I have the depth, and this matchup is very, very nice on their home field for Washington. I think Robinson and Daniels are clear guys to put in your lineup this week. McLaurin, people were not too happy after last week. I think this will be a more comfortable week for McLaurin owners because last week it was more that Tampa Bay was rushing Jaden Daniels so much that he had to get out of the pocket and run the ball a lot. He's not going to run the ball 16 times a game. That's just not going to happen again. McLaurin will get his targets. He'll throw the ball more. That's really it. Those three guys in this offense, it's a great matchup this week against the Giants. So a lot to take advantage of here.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, Jaden Daniels right now is the top 10 option, especially with the really good matchup. B-Rob, like, you're putting him out there. Eckler's a potential flex option, probably more desperation flex, but a flex option nonetheless. And then you're starting Terry. Listen, I think that Zach Ertz is one of those guys that was written off. Like, there's the potential streaming upside on him. I don't know if it's this week because the Giants actually are good at defending against the tight end. But it is a guy that obviously we just talked at the top of the show about Njoku and, the potential that he goes and misses some stuff, misses some weeks here. If Zach Ertz is out there on waivers, potential guy you can go pick up. Ben Sinnott, who everybody was going crazy about before the season started, did not factor in at all last week. Not sure if it's going to continue like that or if he'll get some sort of involvement. But Luke McCaffrey, another guy everybody's sort of excited about. Wouldn't go out and rush to go get Luke McCaffrey right now just based on the name because it really is just not line worthy yet.
Agreed.
All right, so let's jump right into the next one here. Tampa Bay at Detroit. I think that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are actually a pretty good offense. And, they have three guys on their team right now who are probably worth rostering at least at wide receiver. Mike Evans, you're putting him in your lineup. Chris Godwin, you're putting him in your lineup. Jalen McMillan, I'm going out and grabbing if he's out there. Chances are he is out there in your league. That's a guy that I'm going and rostering.
Yeah, agreed, Brett. And another guy, obviously, in Bucky Irving, who right behind Rachaad White got some good touches last week. But it's still clear that White is the number one guy for this week. Yeah, I picked based on matchup in one of my leagues. If you have Rachaad White, you're putting him in your lineup. If it's different from my case where I think based on matchup, yeah, this is a tough one this week. He's going up against Detroit in Detroit. One of the toughest run defenses, arguably the toughest in football, and it's on the road. So I think what you're looking for from White is that Tampa gets down and they're kind of passing the ball a lot. Last week, Rachaad White did struggle on the ground against Washington, but also was able to get a lot of targets out of the backfield. I think he had 7 catches, Brett, out of the backfield. So it kind of tells you where this offense is. Where this offense is at. They want to throw the ball. They want to trust Baker with the ball in his hands. And for Evans and Godwin, in your lineup this week. They're both. I think we're back to the Evans and Godwin together, like as solid targets in fantasy football. Godwin had a rough year last year. I think they're really focusing on getting him back, and a great week one for him. Continue to put him in your lineup.
Yeah, I agree. You're starting both of them. Again, McMillan, you're rostering. Rachaad White, he's in your lineup. Baker Mayfield, potentially in your lineup. It depends on, obviously, what your roster looks like. But if you fell into that sort of Jordan Love trap and like you grabbed him and then you backed him up with Baker, like Baker's a good start this week. I think that a lot of people sort of wrote him off and he kind of flipped the bird on him. So yeah, for me, I think that Baker is a low end quarterback one, very high end quarterback two, and obviously in Superflex, like he's a really good Superflex option. On the other side of the ball, kind of curious on your thoughts, as far as those two running backs go. They're both in my lineup. I think that to me, it really comes down to they're sort of playing the same formula that they played last year. As far as Montgomery's like carries, he's still got 17 of them. Like it would have been a little bit less. And then they kind of said, okay, well, let's just run one drive and let him go. And obviously it took for overtime for that to happen. He ends up scoring the touchdown. But 17 carries, 91 yards. Monty looks like he's going to be the Monty that he was last year. Gibbs, only 11 carries for 40 yards, also scored a touchdown. But you saw him obviously factor into that passing game. He ended up getting 6 targets, 4 catches for 34 yards. And so this is going to be that 1-2 punch, that two-headed monster. You're starting, obviously, Laporta. You're starting Amon-Ra. Jameson Williams kind of came on, and right now he's questionable, and he has an ankle injury. But we sort of saw his emergence, 9 targets he got. And I think that was the most eye-opening thing of his entire game was that he got 9 targets. And that's going to be a pretty significant role if he can get those targets going forward. Obviously, monitor what's happening as far as the injury reports and all that, but he's a pretty solid flex option, I would say, if he is good to go.
Yeah, agreed on all fronts. Start your guys in this offense, a very fun offense to watch up in Detroit. And yeah, if they get Jameson Williams involved, it's a scary offense to have to deal with for opponents. But yeah, Jameson is definitely now a flex option if he's playing this week. You just keep monitoring it, the situation on Sunday.
All right, so jumping right into our next one here is Indianapolis at Green Bay. Zach, for me, the biggest eye-opening thing with Indianapolis was how much they were just letting Anthony Richardson sling the ball way downfield. And it was, it's going to get a little bit tough for him when it comes to the NFL side of it. But in the fantasy world, I don't care about that. He's running the ball, and then he's slinging it 60 yards down the field. Doesn't matter if it's a pick or an incompletion. The times that those go for touchdowns or go for huge gains, like that is just a ridiculous formula for fantasy points. So Richardson for me, top 5 quarterback this week. You're starting Jonathan Taylor. You're starting Pittman. Adonai Mitchell, like you're probably going to bench him, but he's a potential low-end flex option, I would say, for me as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. With Mitchell, and you're also going to monitor the situation with Josh Downs, who may come back this week. Still questionable, and we'll see what it is. If that's the case, if they're both in, I would probably stay away. If Downs is out, then you consider Mitchell. But yeah, I with Richardson, as a fantasy owner, you would probably want to see him pass the ball, maybe even a little bit more. He passed the ball 19 times, Brett, but he only had 9 completions, which it's crazy. He still put up great numbers, but I mean, 9 completions, you're expecting a quarterback to be in double digits and be comfortably in double digits in most scenarios, but he runs the ball a lot. So that definitely makes up for it. Yeah, I would say the top 3 guys in this offense, Richardson, Taylor, and Pittman, are all in your lineup this week against Green Bay, who, I mean, we got a problem at quarterback, Brett.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that really that's just really going to affect Josh Jacobs that much more. I think that Jacobs becomes probably a running back 1 this week, if not a very high end running back 2. Yeah, I just really think that they're going to have to lean into the run, and Malik Willis, we've seen Malik Willis at his worst of worst. I think back to that game where he took on the Buffalo Bills. I think it was Monday Night Football they played. Awful. Just got absolutely torched by the defense. And it was like, okay, well, this guy's going to be out of the league. Like, it was that bad. Obviously Packer fans are hoping that they don't see that Malik Willis. They see the Malik Willis that was, the highly touted draft pick and that sort of upside. They're going to have some sort of game plan to make him comfortable as well. I'm kind of fading all the wide receivers this week. I think Tucker Kraft is going to have some sort of a role, and he's probably a lower end tight end 1 for me, based off of last week's usage. Luke Musgrave for me is becoming almost in drop territory in those more shallow leagues, those 10-team leagues, just based on the fact that I think Tucker Kraft sort of is gaining his edge now over Luke Musgrave. And so, yeah, for me, I'm really starting Josh Jacobs, but it's kind of tough to start anyone else on the Packers.
Yeah, I agree with you. The one guy I'd put on the flex radar at wide receiver is Jayden Reed, because I think with Jayden Reed, you see more of like last week with San Francisco, kind of the Deebo Samuel role. Like Jayden Reed plays that kind of role. He gets those rushing touches. And I think they're going to work a lot of that this week with Malik Willis playing quarterback. If that's the case, like they're going to want to make it as easy as possible, whether that's handing the ball off or just short touches for Josh Jacobs and Jayden Reed. Those two guys are the guys I'd be looking for. I'm benching anybody else. Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Dobbs, they're all off my radar because I cannot see Malik Willis being able to consistently throw the ball this week.
All right, so jumping right into our next matchup, it is the 4 o'clock Eastern time window as the LA Rams travel to Arizona. Zach, let's start with the Rams here. Stafford's probably a borderline quarterback 1. I think it's a good matchup for him. So you're talking about potentially starting him there. Super flex league, like he's an automatic start. You're putting him right in. Cooper Kupp, I think, has a potential to be wide receiver number 1 this week. We talked about at the top of the show, Puka Nacua not there, and there's the ridiculous target share that he's going to get and the amount of targets that Cooper Kupp is going to get this week. So he's an automatic start, potential top option at wide receiver. Kyren Williams, another guy who ended up being a top option, strictly based on the fact that Arizona might throw 3 guys on Cooper Kupp this week, just based off of last week. We talked at the top of the show about like the standouts and how they kind of throw him into motion. I think there's going to be a lot of times where they try to throw him into motion and then they hand it off to Kyren Williams. Sort of fake the defense out a bit and think that they're going to Cooper Kupp, and all of a sudden there's Kyren Williams, bam, right in your face. And so, yeah, he's a start for me. Colby Parkinson, a potential guy that I think might end up getting a bunch of targets based on the fact that Puka is not there and the defense is going to be right up on Cooper Kupp. So Parkinson for me, a borderline tight end 1, a really good streaming option this week. Very good matchup, especially if you lost one of those guys down to injury like Njoku, or you're a little bit fading on some of those other guys that didn't do as well last week. So for me, that's the start. I think DeMarcus Robinson, probably low end flex radar. But I'm not as confident in him as I am in Parkinson.
Yeah, 100%, Brett. Agreed on all fronts, and especially Parkinson. If you have a Ferguson or Njoku who may not play, Colby Parkinson is a perfect guy on the waiver wire to pick up this week. He's going to get those targets without Puka Nacua, and this offense is definitely going to want to take advantage of Arizona's weak secondary. So all the guys you said agreed, and definitely start them all. On the other side, pretty simple with Kyler Murray, James Conner, Marvin Harrison Jr., Trey McBride, and that's it. You're starting those 4 guys against this Rams defense, and you're looking for a better week from Marvin Harrison Jr., and I think you'll get one here. it may not come easy. As we saw last week, it was a little tougher to get Amon-Ra St. Brown the ball, but against this Rams defense, they'll figure something out. And it's kind of they had a couple more weapons to really go to in that offense up in Detroit. When you look at Arizona, yeah, they're going to find Harrison. Uh, Everybody's freaking out. Overreaction Monday. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. might have been top of the list, Brett.
Yeah, and another guy who I was a little bit panicked on was Trey McBride, and he had 9 targets. He only caught 5 of them, only 30 yards. Listen, I think that for the people who went out and they bought a tight end pretty high up in your draft and kind of prioritized those positions, those guys that were up there at the top, none of them did well in week 1. And so just a breath. I think that Trey McBride will be okay. I think that Marvin Harrison will be okay. Sky's the limit, obviously. Like Kyler's going to find both of them because those are his guys. That's going to make them successful. And so, yeah, for me, I'm sticking with both of those guys. I think you start them both, no hesitation. Jumping right to the next one, 4:25 window, Pittsburgh at Denver. Zach, Bo Nix wasn't bad. He wasn't great, but also I don't know that he's really going to have any sort of fantasy appeal at all this season based on this offense.
Yeah, he's not. I think this offense really, you focus on the run game, and we are kind of still waiting and seeing who's going to be that number one. Javonte Williams struggled during his touches last week, but so did Jaleel McLaughlin. I think it was kind of a tough matchup that you really look at being the reason for it. Seattle's front got a lot better in the offseason, and they looked great against this run game. So I still think it's the top 2 guys that you're really looking at is Javonte and McLaughlin. McLaughlin, you'll say will probably get more of the passing yards and will be more of the receiving back. And you see Javonte getting those goal line type of touches and those short yardage plays. The last guy was Audric Estime, and now he's hurt. I think he went on IR in the last couple of days. So then you look at that, and Blake Watson comes up. Not really a guy that you're really looking for. And everybody else in this offense, I don't know how much you can really trust them. The Cortland Suttons of the world, I just don't find a way to really put them in my lineup. You're really just focusing on those 2 guys and in McLaughlin and Williams. And Brett, frankly, this week is a tough one. I don't even know how you really fit them in your lineup this week. You could have better options. This is a really tough matchup against this Pittsburgh defense. So you kind of have to pick and choose here this week.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's a little bit murky as far as the situation with probably flex options. You know, a lot of people go wide receiver at that because of the upside. So I can't blame anybody for betting either one of these guys this week just because until one beats out the other and becomes like the surefire guy, it's a little bit murky. On the other side of the ball, Justin Fields is going to end up being the quarterback this week. To me, he's a super flex option. I think that, you know, you obviously have the rushing upside. Broncos versus Steelers, like it could end up being one of those games where the Steelers go up based on the defense and based on the Steelers defense. They played really, really well last week and surely looked, you know, TJ Watt looked like the best player in the NFL, just quite honestly. And so to me, I think this is going to be a game that Najee and Jaylen Warren sort of dictate. Not for me, must start. I think that Najee's going to get a big workload here. Jaylen Warren's going to factor in as far as the passing game and all of that. And so he's the flex option for me. But Najee for me is really the guy that I think that they're going to lean on here. Freiermuth's probably a borderline start for me. You know, lower end tight end 1, very high end tight end 2. Again, a potential streaming option if you're in an injury bind. George Pickens, I think, is a start. You know, probably a higher end flex option, you know, if not a wide receiver 2, low end wide receiver 2. Like, I think that he's a start and he's going to be the guy. They're going to, again, try to get Justin Fields comfortable. Obviously, he was going to be the backup, and then he wasn't. He was only the backup till he wasn't. And so for me, I think that, you're putting Pickens in no problem. Pretty ridiculous target share. He had 30.4% as far as the volume. And so, even with Patrick Surtain going on him like all week, I think that he'll still have a good week. So he's not going to have a great week, which is why I'm not putting him up top. Very solid flex option.
Yeah, I'd limit expectations for him this week going up against Surtain. Like I said, I'm in a league where I picked Worthy over him in my lineup this week. Yeah, it's kind of one of those situations where if you got a better option, definitely look towards it because it could be a bit of a rough one for Pickens. But I agree on everything. I actually think Fields could be one of those options if you picked up or if you had Jordan Love. And all of a sudden, you just can't find a good backup quarterback, and Justin Fields is sitting there. Like, take him for a week. I mean, they're playing Denver, whose defense is not that good. Besides maybe Surtain out wide, like the run defense is not great. They got pieced up by Kenneth Walker last week. I look at that and say Fields' rushing ability as well is the cheat code in fantasy football for quarterbacks. So definitely a guy to keep an eye on this week.
All right, jumping right to the next game, Cincinnati at Kansas City. Some people say that this is a slam dunk, easy win for Kansas City. Obviously, Cincinnati got wrecked last week against a not-so-great team. T. Higgins looks to be listed as doubtful for this game. Ja'Marr Chase is probably going to be held a little bit in check. And obviously they're going to focus in on him. But he was a full participant in practices this week. And so no concerns whatsoever as far as the injuries or any of that goes. He's in your lineup. I think the real concern for everybody, though, is Joe Burrow. So for me, I'm still rocking with Joe Burrow. I think that Joe Burrow will be okay. But, Zach, if you have one of those higher end options, let's say you drafted Joe Burrow, but you backed him up with a Jaden Daniels. Are you benching Joe Burrow this week?
In a heartbeat, if it's for Jaden Daniels. I would say that it's one of those options, though, that you really are looking at it. You got in a 10-team league, you got Brock Purdy and Joe Burrow. Like, yeah, I would bench Joe Burrow in that situation. Like, that's the kind of spot we're in. His weapons are smaller than it is in most years. So you kind of look at that and it gets you a little bit worried. Now he's going on the road, tough defense at Arrowhead, and may not be the greatest game for the Bengals offense, but you're still going to put Joe Burrow in and Ja'Marr Chase and Zach Moss is a flex option. Kind of hoping that he maybe gets a touchdown, but he is going to get those carries out of the backfield. He'll be the number one back to start this season. We kind of saw that last week that he'll get those touches inside the 5. So I think those are very valuable this year for Cincinnati and a guy to keep on the flex radar.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, I'm kind of with you on all fronts here. As far as the Chiefs go, I think that obviously we saw Hollywood Brown gets put on IR, as we just talked about. So therefore, you're kind of just starting everybody else. Is really what it comes down to. You're rolling with Pacheco. I think you're rolling with Worthy. I think you're rolling with Rashee Rice. I think you're rolling with Travis Kelce. And, of course, you're rolling with Mahomes. And so I think it's just kind of start your guys. If you have them, like, you're putting them in your lineup.
Yeah, 100%. Very happy as a Rashee Rice owner how this season has started. Him being really the possession guy that you kind of saw last week. He's a top 10 wide right now and could be the steal of the draft for a lot of people if he continues to play this season.
All right, so let's jump to a viewer question right now that we got from Kyle. Hey, my guy, hope you've been good. Let's pick 3 of them. Full PPR. Okay, we have Jordan Mason, we have Jerome Ford, we have Kyron Williams, and we have Travis Etienne.
Yeah, I'm going to take Kyron and Etienne, and I'll take Mason. I think Mason this week I would take over Ford, although it's a good matchup maybe for Ford. I think it's just so difficult to trust this offense right now, Brett. They are in a pickle because the offensive line did not look good. The quarterback did not look good. And although Jerome Ford looked pretty good, he got a touchdown, Brett, I think with like 20 seconds left. And that really raised the week to a lot bigger than it. I feel like it actually was. I'd take Mason over Ford, and I'm clearly starting Williams and Etienne every single week.
Yeah, I agree. I think that those are the three guys I would take as well. Ford, it's a little bit murky, as far as the situation now. They're obviously missing Njoku, and so what does the offense sort of look like as everybody channels in on the running game, because you're assuming that it's not going to be a full dose of Amari Cooper just with the quarterback, and so I think it could be a really tough matchup for Ford. We talked during the segment about Jacksonville and Etienne, and how Bigsby kind of worked into the workload. Like, I think he's still okay, and so I'm still rolling with him as well.
100%.
All right, so let's jump right to the next matchup here. Houston, they host Chicago, Sunday Night Football. Zach, I think that you're probably going to start Joe Mixon, though, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a good option this week. You're starting all your guys in this this Houston offense, whether that's all the way down to Tank Dell behind Diggs and Collins. Every single one of these guys is just going to be great this year. And I think they have a solid matchup at home. A lot of people believe a lot in this Bears defense, and rightfully so. They had a great week one in the second half, at least against Tennessee, and they really just kind of took it to them. But I think on the road, it's just a different story against this powerhouse of an offense. I'd also put Dalton Schultz on the radar because of the tight end situation. But he's also in a situation where he actually did practice today. So it'll probably take him off the injury report, Brett. And for that reason, definitely a good option if you're without Njoku or Ferguson this week.
Yeah, Dalton Schultz actually did get pulled off the report, and so he is going to be playing up against the Chicago Bears. So, I think he's a really solid option. He's still available in like 25% of leagues, so definitely go out, check the waiver wire, see if he's out there, because I think it is a solid streaming option there. I agree with you. I think that you kind of just got to start everybody there, and obviously, if you have Dameon Pierce, I would obviously go out and make sure that he's not on somebody's roster. He is 4% rostered right now. Like, the second, let's say Mixon goes down, I think that there's the real potential that Dameon Pierce comes back to being the Pierce that we saw a couple of years ago. And so if you are a Mixon owner, just go get your handcuff. And that's really my suggestion out of this, because of that 30 carry performance, which is just crazy to even just repeat 30 carries. And so you hope that the guy stays healthy the whole season. I don't know how sustainable it is. Obviously, he's not going to get 30 carries every week, but to get more than 20 carries every week, I think even so, it's just not sustainable over a full season. We've just seen that too many times where a guy gets banged up a little bit. And so just go take Dameon Pierce and put him on the edge of your bench. That would be my suggestion as far as the Houston Texans go. As far as the Bears go, I think you're starting DJ Moore. I think you're starting Keenan Allen. Caleb Williams for me is more of a super flex option than anything. But it wasn't an amazing performance. Like, he finished his quarterback 31. He didn't really get much out there. And then a belt performance. Listen, it looked pretty good. But we're not in the NFL business. We're in the fantasy business. And so I'm not starting him. I think super flex is probably, again, like a low end super flex. But if you want to start him for the upside, like, this could be a total shootout on Sunday Night Football. You could go out, you can put him in. And then as far as the, running game goes, you're putting Swift in your lineup, I think, as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. Swift is a little bit of a tough one because you could have just some other options. It's a bit of a weaker matchup this week for him. but he's still going to go in your lineup if you have him and don't have really much else behind him. But for the wide receivers, obviously Odunze is now out, Brett, and looking at that, it's going to lead to more targets for both Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. Keenan Allen's also questionable, so just keep an eye on that as we get closer to Sunday.
Yeah, I should say that Odunze hasn't officially been ruled out, but they are leaning towards keeping him out. And so, yeah, that's sort of why I was like, okay, Keenan Allen becomes this must-start guy because I think the target share is going to be there for him. Jumping right to the next matchup here, Monday Night Football. Zach, I just want to briefly touch on Kirk Cousins because I think that this is something that came up really pretty quickly. And everybody was really concerned about it. It was not good. Just honestly, it was not good. He didn't look like the same Kirk Cousins that we saw, before he tore the Achilles. Don't know if it has to do with the fact that he's on a new team, new weapons, like all of that. It just didn't look good. There's people that were screaming for Michael Penix to come in. I think that if he continues like he played, last week, like we might see Michael Penix sooner rather than later. Arthur Blank didn't really seem to be very patient with his team. And obviously he spends $100 million, goes and brings in a quarterback, then goes and takes a quarterback in the top 10. And so, yeah, I think that the Kirk Cousins conundrum is very, very present. And obviously if you have him, in like a Superflex league, I would say, you're still a little hesitant about playing him in the Superflex role just based on the output from last week. A guy that you're definitely not concerned about, though, is Bijan.
Yeah, 100%. I think when it comes to Kirk, it's kind of everybody relax. It's early. It's one game. They played the Pittsburgh Steelers, one of the probably a top 5 defense in the NFL. Like, it's all good. Relax. I think when you look at this offense, they will figure it out. They will be fine. It was a lot of people's first games for Atlanta, Brett. Kirk Cousins being one of them, but a lot of those coaches, it was their first game being in charge. Zach Robinson, the OC. I mean, you look at it and say, all right, 1 week, they'll be fine. Although it does not get easier this week, they have to go to Philly. And people think that Philly is just going to absolutely run through Atlanta this week. I don't think so. I think Atlanta will keep it closer than a lot of people think. But for Kirk, yeah, you're most likely in Superflex, you're starting him, but definitely staying away. It's a bad matchup here for him against this Philly defense. And in redraft, you're still starting Bijan, you're still starting Drake London, and you're still starting Kyle Pitts, who had the best week of a tight end, it seems, all of a sudden, because he got a touchdown. So that was really cool for Kyle Pitts owners. They said, all right, the time has finally come. He finally did something. So definitely one positive to take from last week was Kyle Pitts. But continue to start those guys and just relax on Atlanta. It's a little early.
Yeah, Kyle Pitts, 3 of 3 for 26 yards and a touchdown. Finished as tight end 3, which just kind of showed that the what the position was last week. For barely any production, and then obviously the touchdown puts him in his tight end 3. Yeah, you're starting all those guys though. Drake London was a big disappointment last week. 2 catches, 15 yards, no scores or anything, and so as a Drake London owner, it can only go up from here. But yeah, I'm guessing that they're going to try to factor in how they can get the ball. Obviously, Bijan must start. Like, we don't have to talk about that. But yeah, I think the concern right now is the Drake London owner, how they can get him in. And now he's heading into Philadelphia, which seems to be a very tough matchup here. On the other side of the ball, you're kind of just starting your guys here. I don't know that you're fading Jalen Hurts. You're not fading Saquon, obviously, one of the top guys in the entire league last week. A.J. Brown, you're playing him. He's questionable, though, so go check those reports. He was limited today with a hamstring injury. They think he'll be okay. Obviously, he has till Monday to basically progress, but he was a limited participant, so something to watch. Devonta, you're playing as well. Dallas Goedert, I think you're also playing in your lineup if you have him, just based on the fact that he has a lot of targets. And, with not a lot, he's still finished as a top 12 tight end. And so I think, there is the potential that Dallas Goedert has some sort of big role. And again, monitor that report with A.J. Brown, because in the case that he doesn't go, I think Dallas Goedert can have a pretty big role here.
Yeah, 1,000% agree. Agreed on all fronts. And Goddard, another guy to keep on the radar if injuries come about at tight end, and kind of dealing with those and replacing them.
All right, so there's our full lineup of games. Let's jump into the last two segments here. We start out with the lock of the week. These are guys that you want to start in your lineup at the flex position. Zach, last week, I took Malik Neighbors to your Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen had 11 targets, and it got pretty close there. And, the workload was there for him. Malik Neighbors, it kind of just seemed like it would be okay. And, it kind of wasn't so good. But at the same time, I still end up taking it here. So I take the first pick here in lock of the week as I go up 1-0. For me, it's Tony Pollard. I think that, like I said during our segment over there about Pollard, I think that for me, the Jets defense, especially the defensive front, without Hassan Reddick there, they've kind of got gashed. And Jordan Mason really gashed them. I think that there will be some opportunities where they try to run Tony Pollard on the outside of the line and not run him right up the middle. We saw the success that, Jordan Mason had last week, that the San Francisco 49ers had last week when they were running guys towards the outside of the line. And so I think that as far as the, Tony Pollard ability to score a touchdown, it's pretty high this week.
Yeah, 100%. And against this Jets defense that you saw Jordan Mason last week, could definitely be a big week for Pollard. For me, I don't know how Keenan Allen with 11 targets only put up 6.9 fantasy points, but that's besides the point. For this week, I'm going with J.K. Dobbins, who I think will do a little bit better for me. He's going up against the worst run defense in football now without Derek Brown in the middle as well, the nose tackle for Carolina. I think J.K. Dobbins is going to run all over this Carolina Panthers team. And we saw it last week, the big play ability of J.K. Dobbins when he's healthy. He can really get it rolling. And I think this week is just going to be another example of that. I think just big week coming for Dobbins.
All right, so let's get right into our ones to watch here. These are guys who are owned in less than 50% of leagues that we think will be there on the waiver wire for you next week. But the reason you should go get them is this week. We think they'll be successful, so getting a jump on there. Zach, it was the same thing as it usually is, where I get the lock of the week, right? And you go get the ones to watch.
Actually, it was the other one.
Actually, I think it was switched last year. Yeah. You took the lock of the weeks, and I got it as the ones to watch. But this past week, I took Andre Iosivas, and I thought that, listen, with the Jamar Chase thing, T. Higgins out, this Cincinnati offense was ready to roll, and sure enough, they weren't. Iosivas finished with 5.6. You take Jerry Jeudy, who ends up going for 11.5 PPR points. And so you get first pick here on ones to watch for a change.
Yeah, what a wild change here. Then, for this week, I'm going – I don't know how this guy's not rostered in 50% of leagues because he's the number 2. And that's kind of what I looked for last week in Jeudy as the number 2 in Cleveland. Jacoby Myers, Brett. I mean, in Vegas now, the number 2 option and the number 2 wide receiver, I should say. I think the number 2 option is Brock Bowers now behind Devontae Adams, but Jacoby Myers is going to get touches. And I look at Gardner Minshew last year and kind of looking at that Josh Downs type of role where you saw Pittman get all of those touches but you also saw Josh Downs getting a good amount of touches as well. And I think when you look at this offense, what they're really focusing on is those possession type of players. Brock Bowers being one of them, Jakobi Meyers being another. And if they can split, I guess, that Josh Downs role between Jakobi Meyers and Brock Bowers, it's going to be a successful passing offense for Vegas. Like I said, only 42% of leagues for Jakobi Meyers. Go pick him up. Definitely a guy to keep on rosters because even if one of those guys goes down, an Adams or a Bowers, Jakobi Meyers will get a nice hefty amount of targets the next week.
Yeah, for me, it was kind of the same formula that I've been using the last year or so. And you kind of just channeled into it. Like, these are potential guys that are the number 2 option here or the number 2 receiver. Guys who we think that obviously it's a matchup where they're going to channel in on, the defense is going to channel in on those top guys, and it sort of can free them up. So I picked Wan'Dale Robinson this week, owned in only 16% of the leagues. And so for me, I really think that if you take a look at what Washington did last week, they played Tampa Bay, and they absolutely got gashed against the slot receiver. And so for me, Wan'Dale Robinson sits in a role right now where he got a pretty good target share last week, and obviously Malik Nabers is still the top option. But they really found Wan'Dale Robinson a lot of the time over the middle. I think that that's going to be the same formula here. And it comes in a week where they're playing Washington. And so I think that there's the potential that Wan'Dale gets a ton of points, ends up being one of the waiver targets that we talk about next week, especially as defenses start to, put their top guys on Malik Nabers and start to double team Malik Nabers, sort of leaves their second option wide open. And while I thought that would be Theo Johnson early on, I think they're sort of easing him into it a bit more. And so Wan'Dale Robinson for me right now is that top waiver pickup one to watch.
Yeah, 100%, Brett.
So that'll do it for this episode, a longer episode, but we wanted to get to all the injury news, and we had to break down obviously every single game. Got some fewer questions in this one as well. Zach, anything that you're looking forward to here in week 2?
Yeah, I mean, my big decisions, of course, kind of the week where there's some good matchups, and I have a fair amount of depth on a lot of my rosters, just seeing if it comes through to fruition, starting one guy over another. And I will definitely have my eye on that Washington Giant game that you just talked about. Like, I got a lot of guys going in, and I think it's good matchups for both offenses.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's going to be some shootouts in this week's games. And I'm actually kind of curious. More, we just talked about it, but I'm really curious how that Atlanta-Philadelphia game goes. And, if the boos get louder for Kirk Cousins, obviously they're Philadelphia, so it's not going to be they're going to boo anybody on the other team. But, as far as the Atlanta crowd and obviously like attention to social media and all of that, are they going to be screaming for Michael Penix Jr. Come Tuesday? I really think is the big thing for me. If they start out, 0-2, it's not really going to be great. And then I'm pretty sure they play Kansas City the following week. And so, correct if I'm wrong. And so there's the potential that we're talking about an 0-3 start. And, those owners aren't really that patient in the NFL. And so kind of curious to see what happens there.
Yeah, definitely agree.
So should be fun, and please subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you get. Give us a thumbs up, and in the words of Aaron Rodgers, the night is darkest before the dawn, and we shall rise yet again. Back now, I'm Brett Malman. This has been the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. We'll catch you on the next one.